I was sitting in my beat-up Honda outside Bella Vista restaurant watching my family through the open window. They were celebrating something and I had just stepped outside to take an important client call about a $50,000 cryptocurrency project. That is when I heard my Aunt Susan's voice cutting through the evening air like a knife. "You'll always be a worthless nobody, Claudia." The entire table erupted in laughter as they raised their glasses in a toast to not having to worry about supporting Claudia anymore. I looked down at my phone, staring at my banking app that showed dozens of transactions transferring money to every single person sitting at that table. Before I tell you how I made them realize exactly what they had lost, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and hit that like button if you have ever been underestimated by people who should have known better. Trust me, what I did the next morning changed everything, and they had no idea what was coming. Let me explain how this whole situation started because the truth was far more complicated than anyone at that table could have imagined. My name is Claudia, and at 32, I had spent the last 7 years living a carefully constructed lie. To my family, I was the struggling freelance tech consultant who could barely make ends meet. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a dented bumper, lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment, and shopped almost exclusively at thrift stores. What they did not know was that this humble lifestyle was completely intentional. Since I was 25, I had been investing 70% of my substantial income into cryptocurrency and stock markets. My freelance work was not the small-time consulting they imagined. I was handling major blockchain projects for Fortune 500 companies, earning anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 per project. My family situation had always been complex. My parents, Frank and Dorothy, were both 68 and living on a fixed retirement income that barely covered their basic expenses. My older brother Tommy was 35, married to Sarah with 2 young kids, and a mortgage they could barely afford on his construction worker salary. My 26-year-old sister Natalie was in her 3rd year of medical school with tuition costs that seemed to climb higher every semester. Then there was my Aunt Susan, my mother's dramatic sister married to Uncle Pete, who always acted like they were more successful than they actually were. What none of them realized was that I had been their silent financial guardian angel for 4 years. It started when Dad got laid off from his factory job when I was 28. I watched my parents stress about bills, saw Tommy struggling to keep up with mortgage payments, and knew Natalie was considering dropping out of medical school because of the costs. That is when I decided to help, but I did it in a way that would preserve their dignity and prevent them from feeling like charity cases. I created an elaborate system of support that made it appear like they were receiving help from other sources. For my parents, I set up what appeared to be a government assistance program that supplemented their Social Security by $1,800 every month. For Tommy, I arranged for fake paperwork that made it look like he had received a substantial raise that covered an extra $2,200 monthly toward his mortgage. For Natalie, I created a fictional scholarship program that paid $3,500 each semester directly to her school. Even Susan and Pete benefited from what they believed was an employee discount program through Pete's company that covered their $450 monthly car payment. The logistics were incredibly complex. I used a shell company I had created for tax purposes and hired third-party services to generate official-looking documentation. When my parents received their monthly government assistance check, it came with official letterhead and caseworker contact information that led back to a service I paid to handle inquiries. Tommy's raise appeared on pay stubs that I had professionally created and delivered through his actual payroll company's system. Natalie's scholarship came with university letterhead and academic requirements that I made sure she could easily meet. Over 4 years, I had quietly transferred $847,000 to support my family's various needs. This did not include the emergency bailouts when Dad needed heart surgery, when Tommy's roof leaked and caused water damage, or when Natalie's car broke down during finals week. I covered hospital bills, home repairs, and every crisis that threatened to derail their lives. But here is what made the whole situation so painful. The more I helped them, the more they seemed to look down on me. Because I maintained the appearance of financial struggle, they constantly made comments about my situation. During family gatherings, I would hear whispered conversations about how I needed to get my life together and find a real job with benefits. They would assign me the least expensive dishes to bring to potluck dinners, assuming I could not afford anything elaborate. When gift-giving occasions arose, I was expected to contribute the smallest amounts while they bought expensive presents for each other. The irony was crushing. I was living below my means to help them live above theirs, but they interpreted my frugality as failure. Every month I would transfer thousands of dollars to ensure their comfort, while listening to lectures about financial responsibility and life choices. I told myself it was worth it because family was supposed to take care of each other, but deep down their constant condescension was slowly breaking my heart. The evening that changed everything started like any other family dinner. We had planned to meet at Bella Vista, a upscale Italian restaurant that I knew I would end up paying for, despite the fact that I had just closed a cryptocurrency consulting deal worth $50,000 that afternoon. I arrived 20 minutes late because the client call had run longer than expected, and when I walked into the restaurant, I could immediately sense the tension. My family was already seated at a large round table, and they had clearly been talking about me before I arrived. Susan's voice was particularly loud as she announced, "Well, look who finally decided to join us. Don't worry, Claudia, we already ordered appetizers. We did not want you to feel pressured to split something you could not afford." The comment stung, but I was used to these little jabs. What I was not prepared for was what happened when I stepped outside to take an urgent phone call from another potential client. The restaurant had large windows that opened onto the sidewalk, and the evening was warm enough that most of them were propped open for fresh air. As I stood on the sidewalk discussing a blockchain implementation project, I could hear every word of the conversation happening at our table. I just do not understand how someone can be 32 years old and still living like a college student. Susan was saying, her voice dripping with disdain. I mean, look at that car she drives. It is embarrassing. At least we do not have to worry about her asking us for money. Tommy responded with a laugh. Can you imagine if we had to support her on top of everything else? My mother's voice joined in. I just wish she would find a nice man to take care of her. She is never going to be successful on her own with that attitude. Some people never figure out how to be successful, my father added. We raised her the same way we raised Tommy and Natalie, but she just never learned how to apply herself. But it was Natalie's comment that hit the hardest. It is honestly embarrassing when my classmates ask about my family. What am I supposed to say, that my sister is a 32-year-old freelancer who still shops at Goodwill? The conversation continued for several more minutes, each family member adding their own observations about my supposed failures and inadequacies. They discussed my apartment, my clothes, my car, and my career choices with a level of contempt that made my stomach turn. These were the people I had been secretly supporting for 4 years, and they were talking about me like I was a burden they were relieved not to carry. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Susan stood up, raising her wine glass with theatrical flair. You know what? Let's make a toast. This has been a wonderful year for our family. Tommy got his big promotion and finally has financial security. Natalie's scholarship is covering her entire education. Your parents are comfortable with their government assistance program. And best of all, we do not have to worry about supporting Claudia anymore, because she is finally independent. The table erupted in laughter as Susan continued, She'll always be a worthless nobody, but at least she is our independent worthless nobody. Every person at that table raised their glass and drank to that toast. My brother, my sister, my parents, my aunt and uncle. They were celebrating their good fortune while simultaneously mocking the person who had made it all possible. I stood on that sidewalk, phone pressed to my ear, with a client who was offering me another lucrative contract, watching my family toast to my worthlessness. With shaking hands, I opened my banking app and scrolled through the transaction history. The numbers told the real story: Tommy's promotion, that I had been funding for 3 years. Natalie's scholarship that came directly from my investment accounts. My parents' government assistance that I had been providing since Dad's layoff. The total amount I had transferred to support their comfortable lives was staggering $847,000 over 4 years. I thought about all the times I had eaten ramen noodles for dinner so I could send Tommy an extra $500 for his mortgage. I remembered skipping meals to ensure Natalie's tuition payment went through on time. I recalled wearing the same 3 outfits repeatedly while my family went on shopping sprees funded by money I had secretly provided. Standing on that sidewalk listening to them laugh about my worthlessness while living off my generosity, I made a decision that would change everything. If I was such a worthless nobody, then surely they would not mind living without my worthless help. I finished my call with the new client, walked back into the restaurant, and sat through the rest of dinner with a smile on my face. But inside, I was planning exactly how I was going to teach them what my worth really looked like. I woke up at 5:30 the next morning with absolute clarity about what needed to happen. For 4 years, I had been enabling my family's contempt by hiding my success and generosity. They had grown comfortable not just with my financial support, but with the idea that they were superior to me. It was time to show them exactly what life looked like when the worthless nobody disappeared from their world. My first stop was my laptop, where I logged into the various accounts and systems I had created to funnel money to my family. One by one, I began canceling every automatic transfer, every recurring payment, and every financial support system I had put in place. Tommy's mortgage assistance canceled. My parents' monthly supplement terminated. Natalie's tuition payments stopped. Susan and Pete's car payment coverage ended. The process was more complex than simply stopping payments. I had to contact the shell company that handled the fake government assistance program and instruct them to send termination letters to my parents. I had to coordinate with the payroll service that had been generating Tommy's false pay stubs to end the arrangement. I needed to notify the university's financial aid office that Natalie's scholarship had been discontinued due to funding changes. Every fake system I had created needed to be systematically dismantled. By 8 a.m., I had successfully cut off every source of financial support my family had been receiving. But I did not want them to immediately suspect that I was involved, so I had the various organizations send official-looking notices explaining that their benefits were ending due to budget cuts, policy changes, or administrative restructuring. Each family member would receive a different explanation for why their financial situation had suddenly changed. The first call came that afternoon. Tommy sounded confused and slightly panicked as he explained that there had been some kind of mistake with his payroll. "Claudia, the weirdest thing happened. My boss is saying I never got a raise 3 years ago, but I have been getting the extra money every month. Now they are claiming it was some kind of error, and they want me to pay back over $60,000. I listened with carefully measured sympathy. "That sounds terrible, Tommy. Have you talked to HR about it? Maybe there is some kind of documentation that could help clarify the situation." "That is the thing," he said, his voice getting higher with stress. "There is no documentation. It is like the raise never existed, but I have been counting on that money for years. Without it, Sarah and I cannot make our mortgage payments." The second call came from my parents 2 days later. Mom sounded elderly and confused in a way that broke my heart despite everything. "Claudia, honey, we got the strangest letter from the Social Security office. They are saying that we have been receiving supplemental payments that do not exist in their system. They want us to come in for an interview because they think there might have been some kind of fraud." "Fraud?" I asked, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "That sounds serious, Mom. Do you have any idea what they are talking about? We have been getting an extra $1,800 every month for 4 years. Dad's voice joined the conversation as he picked up the extension. "Now they are saying those payments never existed. How can payments that went into our bank account not exist?" By the end of the first week, each branch of my family was dealing with their own crisis. Natalie called in tears because the university's financial aid office had informed her that her scholarship had been discontinued and she owed over $14,000 in back tuition. Susan was hysterical because the car dealership was threatening repossession, claiming that Pete's company had never offered employee discounts and that their financing was fraudulent. What made the situation even more devastating for them was that they had all built their lifestyles around the extra money they thought was coming from legitimate sources. Tommy and Sarah had taken out additional credit cards, confident in their ability to pay them off with Tommy's raise. My parents had moved to a more expensive apartment, assuming their government assistance would continue indefinitely. Natalie had committed to an expensive study abroad program, believing her scholarship would cover the costs. Susan and Pete had accumulated significant debt, thinking Pete's job benefits would handle their car payments. The second week brought a new level of panic as they began comparing stories and realizing that their situations were connected. Tommy mentioned to Dad that his raise had disappeared, and Dad mentioned that their government assistance was being investigated. When they called Natalie to check on her, they learned about her scholarship problems. The family started to suspect that something larger was happening, but they could not figure out what it was. That is when they called an emergency family meeting. The irony was not lost on me when they chose to meet at my parents' apartment, the same apartment they were now realizing they could not afford without the financial assistance they had been receiving. I arrived deliberately late, and for the first time in years, I dressed in some of my actual nice clothes instead of the thrift store outfit they expected. When I walked into the apartment wearing a designer blazer and carrying a Louis Vuitton handbag I had purchased but never used, the entire family stared at me like they were seeing a stranger. Susan was the first to recover her voice. "Claudia, where did you get those clothes? Please tell me you did not go into debt trying to impress someone." I sat down calmly and looked around at their worried faces. Tommy was pacing nervously. My parents looked confused and scared. Natalie was red-eyed from crying, and Susan looked like she was about to have a breakdown. These were the same people who had toasted to my worthlessness just 2 weeks earlier. "So," I said, settling back into the couch with a calm I did not feel inside. "I understand there have been some financial complications for everyone lately. Tell me what has been happening." For the next hour, I listened as each family member detailed their crisis. Tommy explained about his missing raise and the potential lawsuit from his employer. My parents described the Social Security investigation and their fear of being accused of fraud. Natalie sobbed about having to drop out of medical school because she could not afford tuition. Susan ranted about the car repossession and how Pete's company was claiming they had never offered the discount program. When they finished, the room fell silent. Everyone was looking at me expectantly, though I was not sure why. Finally, Tommy spoke up. "Claudia, we know this might be a lot to ask, but do you have any savings we could borrow? We are talking about losing everything, and we do not know where else to turn." The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Here were the people who had spent years mocking my financial situation, asking me for money in their moment of crisis. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I had prepared specifically for this moment. "Actually," I said, opening the folder and spreading documents across the coffee table, "I think there might be some confusion about who owes what to whom." The papers I had laid out were bank statements, transaction records, and documentation of every dollar I had secretly sent to support their lifestyles over the past 4 years. The numbers were undeniable, printed in black and white with dates, amounts, and recipient information clearly visible. "What is this?" Mom asked, picking up one of the statements with trembling hands. "That," I said calmly, "is a record of the $847,000 I have transferred to support this family over the past 4 years. Tommy, your raise was never real. I have been covering $2,200 of your mortgage every month for 3 years. Mom and Dad, that government assistance you have been receiving, it came from my investment accounts, not Social Security. Natalie, your scholarship was funded entirely by me. Susan, that employee discount program was completely fake. I have been paying $450 a month toward your car payment." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as each family member processed the information, their faces cycling through confusion, disbelief, and slowly dawning realization. Tommy was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "You mean, my promotion was fake? You have been paying my mortgage this whole time." "Not just your mortgage," I replied, pulling out additional documents. "I also covered your roof repair last year, your credit card debt from Christmas, and the emergency room bill when Sarah broke her wrist. The total amount I have given your family specifically is $105,600. I turned to my parents next. Mom and Dad, in addition to the monthly assistance I covered Dad's heart surgery, copay the furnace replacement, and the property tax lien you did not know about. Your total is $86,400. Natalie was crying openly now as I continued. "Natalie, beyond tuition, I paid for your laptop, your textbooks, and that study abroad program you start next month. $42,000 total." Finally, I looked at Susan, whose face had gone completely white. "And Susan, in addition to your car payments, I covered Pete's dental work and that vacation to Florida you took last year. $21,600. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the kitchen wall. Finally, Susan found her voice, though it came out as a croak. But why would you do all this without telling us?" I leaned back in my chair and looked at each of them carefully. "Because I love this family, and I wanted you to be comfortable and happy. I did not want you to feel like charity cases or worry about money when I had the ability to help." "Then why did you stop?" Tommy asked, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the voice recording app. With a few taps, Susan's voice filled the room. "She'll always be a worthless nobody, but at least she is our independent worthless nobody." The recording continued, playing back the entire conversation from the restaurant 2 weeks earlier. I watched their faces change as they heard themselves mocking my appearance, my job, my lifestyle, and my worth as a human being. When the recording reached the part where they toasted to not having to worry about supporting Claudia anymore, I saw Susan put her face in her hands. When the recording ended, I spoke into the silence. "That is why I stopped. I realized that not only were you not grateful for my help, but you actively despised me while living off my generosity. You called me a worthless nobody while I was making your comfortable lives possible." The aftermath of that revelation was unlike anything my family had ever experienced. The immediate response was chaos, tears, apologies, desperate attempts to explain away their words, and frantic begging for me to reconsider my decision. But the damage to our relationships went far deeper than hurt feelings, and the financial consequences of losing my support began to manifest within days. Tommy was the first to face reality. Without the $2,200 I had been contributing monthly, he and Sarah could not make their mortgage payment. They had exactly 3 weeks before the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. The credit cards they had accumulated, confident in their ability to pay them off, now represented over $30,000 in debt they could not service. Within a month, Tommy had to make the devastating decision to sell their house and move his family into a rental apartment that cost half as much, but was significantly smaller and in a worse school district. My parents' situation was equally dire, but more heartbreaking because of their age. The Social Security investigation had cleared them of fraud charges when I provided documentation showing that the payments had come from a private source, but they were left facing the reality of living on their actual fixed income for the first time in 4 years. The apartment they had chosen was beyond their means, and they had accumulated expenses assuming their assistance would continue. They were forced to move back to senior housing and apply for actual government assistance programs that provided far less than I had been giving them. Natalie's crisis was perhaps the most dramatic because her entire future hung in the balance. Medical school tuition could not simply be paused or postponed. She owed the university over $14,000 in immediate back payments, and without that money, she would be unable to register for her fourth-year classes. For the first time in her life, she had to take out student loans with brutal interest rates and find a part-time job to cover her living expenses. The study abroad program she had been excited about was canceled, along with several other opportunities that required financial resources she no longer had. Susan and Pete faced their own humiliation when their luxury car was repossessed in front of their neighbors. They had grown accustomed to living beyond their means, and without the $450 monthly assistance, their carefully constructed lifestyle collapsed. Pete's coworkers learned about the fake employee discount program when the dealership contacted his company for payment verification, leading to embarrassment and questions about his integrity at work. But the most significant change was not financial. It was relational. Within 6 weeks of my cutting off support, the family dynamics had completely shifted. The people who had spent years treating me with condescension and barely disguised contempt were suddenly approaching me with a level of respect I had never experienced from them. The turning point came at our annual family reunion, an event hosted by my grandmother's sister that brought together over 40 relatives from across the state. This year, the reunion carried extra weight because word had somehow spread about the financial revelations within our immediate family. I arrived at the event prepared for awkward conversations, but what I found was something entirely different. Susan approached me within minutes of my arrival, and for the first time in our relationship, her voice carried no trace of superiority or judgment. "Claudia, I need to say something publicly, and I need to do it now before I lose my courage." She asked for everyone's attention, and then proceeded to tell the entire extended family about what had really been happening for the past 4 years. She detailed my secret financial support, the fictional programs I had created to preserve their dignity, and the cruel words we had spoken about me while benefiting from my generosity. Her apology was thorough, specific, and delivered with tears streaming down her face. "I called my niece a worthless nobody while she was paying for my car," she said to a crowd of shocked relatives. "I mocked her clothes while she was ensuring my family could afford nice things. I questioned her life choices while she was quietly making all our lives better. I have been cruel to someone who deserved nothing but gratitude, and I am ashamed of myself." The response from the extended family was immediate and overwhelming. Aunts and uncles who had always treated me as the struggling member of the family suddenly saw me in an entirely different light. Cousins who had offered sympathetic pats on the shoulder began asking for financial advice. The family narrative about me shifted completely in the span of that one conversation. Over the following months, I made selective decisions about resuming support based on demonstrated changes in attitude and behavior. Tommy was the first to earn back my assistance, but only partial support, and only after he and Sarah attended financial counseling and created a realistic budget that did not depend on my help. They learned to live within their actual means, while I provided a modest safety net for emergencies. My parents received limited assistance after they demonstrated genuine gratitude and stopped making assumptions about my lifestyle choices. Instead of the substantial monthly support they had been receiving, I established an emergency fund that they could access for medical bills or major home repairs, but only after discussing the situation with me first. Natalie's support resumed with strict conditions tied to her academic performance and a requirement that she maintain part-time employment to contribute to her own expenses. She could no longer assume that her education would be entirely funded by someone else, but she also did not have to abandon her dreams due to financial constraints. Susan took the longest to earn back any level of support, and even then it was minimal and conditional. She had to demonstrate sustained changes in how she spoke to and about me, and she had to acknowledge publicly whenever the topic arose the role I had played in her family's previous financial stability. The experience taught all of us lessons that went far beyond money. My family learned that assumptions about someone's worth based on appearances or lifestyle choices can be devastatingly wrong. They discovered that gratitude must be expressed, and that taking someone for granted can have permanent consequences. For me, the experience was transformative in ways I had not expected. I learned to set boundaries while maintaining love, to demand respect without withdrawing affection entirely, and to value myself independent of others' opinions. My business thrived as word spread about my financial acumen, leading to new clients and speaking opportunities about wealth building and family financial dynamics. 1 year later, my net worth had grown to over $4 million. But more importantly, my relationship with my family had evolved into something healthier and more honest. We still gathered for holidays and celebrations, but the dynamics were fundamentally different. There were no more whispered comments about my choices, no more assignments of the cheapest gifts or smallest contributions. When my opinion was sought on any topic, it was valued and respected. The most profound change was in how I viewed myself. For years, I had measured my worth by how much I could give to others, even when those others did not appreciate my sacrifice. I learned that being valued for your contributions is not the same as being valued for who you are, and that real love requires mutual respect, not just financial support. My family learned that money has emotional value that goes far beyond its numerical amount. When you assume someone's worth based on their apparent financial situation, you risk overlooking the very person who might be making your life possible. They discovered that gratitude is not just a nice gesture. It is a fundamental requirement for healthy relationships. Most importantly, we all learned that respect cannot be bought, but it can definitely be lost. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to show them exactly what life looks like when they take you for granted. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever been underestimated by people who should have known better? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you think I was too harsh, or if my family got what they deserved. Hit that like button if this story resonates with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, financial boundaries, and the courage it takes to demand the respect you deserve. Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their worth is not determined by what others think of them. And remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show people what they lose when they fail to appreciate what they have. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to value yourself as much as you value others, because you deserve nothing less than genuine respect and appreciation.